Have y'all heard of Byron Allen? Are y'all familiar with him?
I've heard his name a
Heard his
few
name.
times, but I don't know what he does. I think he was trying to buy like the Washington Redskins or something, or whatever they're called now. Back in the day.
So yeah, well, he put a bid in to try to buy the
Oh, it's the
Broncos
Broncos.
when they
Gotcha.
recently were up when they were recently up for sale. I think they sold. I'm not sure for how much or who. I think the guy that owned Home Depot bought him or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, Byron Allen for the like we all should know him. First of all, he's a black man, so we should just know him from that standpoint because he's done some incredibly successful things. So we should definitely know him. But he's from Detroit actually, which I recently learned about. So he was born and raised in Detroit, so not far from where I grew up. And he has a really interesting story. So I have some notes on him that I think might be the people might find attractive. So first off, when he was growing up, his grandparents were entrepreneurs. They owned a skating rink in Detroit. This was back in the 1950s. They were like one of the first black families to like own a skating rink in Detroit. And for those who don't know, like Detroit has always had a really interesting skating culture. Like you go there, like there's skating rinks all over the city. Like there's one skating rink on 8 Mile. There's
8 Mile,
really
yeah,
popular.
Northland.
Yeah, like yeah, Northland skating rink. Like skating culture in Detroit has always been huge. And his family was kind of like at the forefront of that back in the 1950s. So he was, right away kind of thrown into the world of business. Kind of similar to my background. My grandparents owned a bakery. So I had a front seat into that business world as well. But he started his career in the 70s as a comedian. And he did stand up on like the Johnny Carson show. So for those who don't know, Johnny Carson is a host of a late night was a host of a late night show. I guess this prolific host, he kind of defined like late night TV. So, if you watch, any ABC, NBC, CNBC, like any of the major networks at 10, 11 o'clock, there's late night shows that come on. Those things were really popular. And this guy back in the 70s, a black man, was on Johnny Carson, a white TV show, doing stand up comedy. It was unheard of. He was the youngest one to ever do that. And he would end up going off from doing comedy to doing some TV shows, hosting some shows, just kind of learning the business of media. And he ended up learning more about the business side. So not just like being in front of the camera, but really what happens behind the scenes. How do media companies actually get deals done? How do they actually attract advertising? Just really learning the ropes. And in the 1990s, he ended up launching a TV show with his mother. Um, and they actually own the show. They own the TV show and they own the distribution. So typically, when you have a show, you can go to somebody else who then will what they call this process like syndicating. So they basically will go out and sell it to different networks on your behalf. They didn't want to do that. They cut out the middleman, essentially vertically integrated their own process. So they not only created the show, owned the rights to the show, but they literally called 1,300 show TV stations back in the 90s to get their show distributed. And out of 1,300 TV stations, only 150 was willing to distribute it, which was still huge back then. So they took that. And so not only did they own the show, but they also owned the distribution relationships for their show. So they obviously were able to monetize that much better than if they had a middleman. So he was already starting to make some interesting moves again in the 90s. And whenever like big cable companies wouldn't take their show, he took them to court. Like he literally sued like Comcast, AT&T, Charter Cable for discriminating against black media companies. So basically his argument in court was like, hey, you're willing to work with these white media companies, these white media brands, but you aren't willing to work with me. And all of those big companies end up settling with him and end up taking his channels and taking his TV shows. So all throughout the 90s, he was not only creating TV shows, but he was also acquiring television channels, cable channels from all over the country. And in fact, in 2000, kind of fast forward a little bit, in 2021, he sued McDonald's for not advertising with black networks. Like this guy is like is prolific in many ways and just how he does business, but and leveraging the legal system to really get equity in a seat at the table. In 2018, this is one of his most amazing purchases. In 2018, he purchased a Weather Channel for $310 million in cash. I'm sure y'all have heard of the Weather
Million
Channel, right?
or billion?
Of course.
Cash, $310 million in cash.
Crazy. Yeah.
And that made him the first Black American to own a 24-hour mainstream cable network. And so the company that is doing all this is this media company called Allen Media Group. And right now it has like 24 to 2,500 employees. They reach over 200 million subs daily through their stations and networks. They own tons of media networks, local networks all across the country. So these local networks power like local news. So like let's say you're in Detroit or Houston, like where I'm at, and you want local news. You want to know like what's happening in Houston, what's happening in Detroit, what's happening wherever you are. A lot of people rely on their local news and local stations to provide them that information. They own these networks, they own these stations, these broadcast stations, and the distribution companies behind them as well. It's a multi-billion-dollar operation, and so yeah, I thought he just deserves some like some recognition because he's moving, and right now he's in a bid to purchase BET. So he's bidding amongst Tyler Perry is bidding, Diddy's bidding. There's a lot of people who are bidding,
Don't give it to Diddy.
but he's one of those who's bidding.
Don't give it to Diddy. Diddy doesn't deserve it. I don't care. I don't care. I like Diddy, but Diddy's Diddy. Like he has revolt. Like he has revolt. Okay. Diddy's Diddy. No hate,
Yeah,
no
yeah,
shame. Diddy's Diddy. We love but like let's give it to Tyler Perry or my man's Byron. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because Byron, he clearly has the business mind, um, I'm not just saying that because we're from the same place, but it is dope to hear that story. Thank you for sharing that, Dre. Hopefully, people look into Byron Allen, look a little bit into Detroit's history, some of the surrounding cities as well. Obviously, shout out to Farmington Hills, of course, but it's down the street from some of those skating rinks that you talked about. But
Yep.
um, but yeah, that's dope. I never knew he did all that. But I'm not gonna lie, I need to do more research into him because when I think about BAT, that's a big deal. That's also an interesting deal as far as the culture and everything. And I guess
Yeah,
we're running out of time.
I think
Running out
was
of time,
I
but
think what's
go
interesting.
ahead.
I just want to say this real quick. I think what's really interesting about him is his path to like success,
Yeah.
right? And really,
Mhm.
what it came through
Medium part.
is is really through acquisition, right? Like that was his strategy, and that's been their strategy, right? Is acquiring these assets, whether these assets that are undervalued, right, like financially undervalued, or people perceive them to be undervalued and they're not, whatever it may be. But his ability to like acquire these
He's,
businesses
he's
and roll them
resourceful.
up, and use that cash flow to then acquire more businesses and roll them up, I think is incredible. And so it's an interesting strategy. And so again, we talk a lot about startups, right, and starting a startup from scratch. And I've been a big proponent of this, is like there's multiple ways to build a business. And I think like we
100%.
should try to cover and think about and share like multiple ways to do it, because not everybody is cut out to go 0 to 1.
Mm.
This shit is hard. It is very
Yeah,
difficult. It's hard. And I don't recommend nobody do it. I
I
really
don't
don't.
either.
I don't,
I actually
because
don't
most
either.
people who are trying to build a business are really chasing the lifestyle. And if you're really chasing the lifestyle, there's a
Yeah,
much
your
easier
lifestyle
way to get
decision.
it. There's a much
Yeah.
easier way to get it.
For example,
And
building
I'm
some
not saying
tools.
buying a business is easy. I'm not trying to diminish that, but there's many ways to do it. And I think that's the beauty of like sharing stories like Byron.
The one thing I do want to
And
add
Byron
is
had leverage. And he never let it go.
nah. The thing I want to add is like buying the Weather Channel is nothing slight. Like
Right.
for anybody,
That's a big deal.
but for a black man, you do you know that I'm pretty sure that every local news channel is getting some of their data from the Weather Channel.
Exactly. Yes.
Yes,
And
everywhere.
and
Yes.
this was
The whole
fascinating too.
national.
So just last year, the Weather Channel was like from a survey of, it looks like about 80 million households, the Weather Channel was voted the most trustworthy media organization. So you're
That's
telling
dope. That's
me
dope. Yeah.
he got the Weather Channel plugging all the other news channels across America that you get your information,
Yeah.
and then in this current media landscape, his stuff is considered the most trustworthy. And weather is
Crazy.
unpredictable.
Yeah.
You can't trust anything your
Crazy.
weatherman is saying.